Detective Sarah Chen stood in the empty apartment, staring at the outline of dust where a human body had once been. It was the 15th disappearance this month across New Geneva Colony, and like all the others, there were no signs of struggle, no blood, no evidence of forced entry. The victim had simply vanished into thin air. Same as the others, Officer Martinez said, shaking his head as he scanned the room with his electronic tablet. David Kumar, age 34, software engineer. His neighbors heard nothing unusual. Security cameras show him entering his apartment at 8:47 p.m. yesterday. This morning, his cleaning robot found the apartment empty. Sarah knelt beside the dust outline on the living room floor. The pattern was too perfect, too precise. It looked like someone had carefully traced around a human body and then removed everything within those lines. Even stranger, the dust outside the outline was undisturbed, as if the person had never moved from that exact position. The Galactic Council is getting nervous, Martinez continued, lowering his voice. Ambassador Zexthon called an emergency meeting for tomorrow. They want answers. Sarah had been dreading this moment. For 3 years, humanity had been part of the Galactic Council, the youngest species ever admitted to the prestigious organization that governed interstellar relations. Humans had proven themselves worthy through their technological innovations and peaceful nature. But now, with humans mysteriously disappearing from colonies across the galaxy, other species were beginning to ask uncomfortable questions. The communicator on Sarah's belt buzzed. Detective Chen, this is Captain Rodriguez. We need you at headquarters immediately. We have a situation. Sarah and Martinez exchanged glances. In her 10 years as a detective, Sarah had learned that situations usually meant trouble with a capital T. The police headquarters buzzed with activity when they arrived. Officers rushed between departments, their faces grim. Captain Rodriguez, a stern woman in her 50s, met them at the entrance. We just received word from the council, Rodriguez said without preamble. The disappearances aren't limited to New Geneva. Human colonies on Kepler 442b, Proxima Centauri, and Ross 128 are reporting similar incidents. We're talking about over 300 missing humans across the galaxy. Sarah felt her stomach drop. 300 people didn't just vanish without a trace. What does the council think is happening? That's the problem, Rodriguez replied, leading them to the main briefing room. Some species are suggesting that humans are inherently unstable. They think we might be abandoning our colonies and reverting to some kind of primitive nomadic behavior. The briefing room's large screen displayed a star map with red dots marking each affected colony. The pattern seemed random at first glance, but Sarah noticed something odd. All the affected colonies were relatively new, established within the last 5 years. Have any other species reported similar disappearances? Sarah asked. None, Rodriguez said. Only humans. The Zilithians think it might be a genetic defect. The Arcturians believe we're too emotionally unstable for space colonization. And the Vortaxians? She paused, looking uncomfortable. The Vortaxians are suggesting that humanity should be removed from the Council until we can prove we're capable of responsible colonization. Sarah studied the star map more carefully. Something about the pattern nagged at her detective instincts. Who discovered most of these colonies? Martinez pulled up the data on his tablet. Looks like the Zilithians found about 60% of them. They recommended these planets to the Council as suitable for human colonization. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. The Zilithians were one of the most advanced species in the galaxy, known for their scientific expertise and seemingly genuine desire to help younger species integrate into galactic society. They had been humanity's strongest supporters during the admission process. I want to visit one of these colonies, Sarah announced. If we're going to solve this, I need to see the disappearance sites firsthand. The Council has forbidden travel to the affected areas, Rodriguez said. They claim it's for our own safety. Sarah crossed her arms. Then I guess I'll have to break some rules. That evening, Sarah sat in her small apartment, reviewing case files on her personal computer. The official reports all told the same story: humans entering their homes or workplaces and simply vanishing. No witnesses, no evidence, no trace of where they might have gone. But Sarah had learned long ago that official reports often missed the most important details. She began cross-referencing the disappearances with colony records, looking for patterns that others might have overlooked. What she found made her blood run cold. Every single disappearance had occurred within 24 hours of the victim receiving a routine health scan from the colony's medical center. And every colony's medical center used Zilithian-designed scanning equipment. Sarah's hands shook as she dug deeper into the data. The Zilithians had insisted that regular health monitoring was essential for human colonists, claiming that space travel and alien environments could have unpredictable effects on human physiology. The Council had agreed, making the scans mandatory for all human settlers. Her computer chimed with an incoming message. The sender was listed as unknown, but the content made her heart race. Detective Chen, if you're reading this, you're closer to the truth than anyone realizes. The disappearances are not random, they are not natural, and they are not accidents. Meet me at Docking Bay 7 at midnight if you want to save your species. Come alone. Trust no one from the Council. Sarah stared at the message for a long moment. Every instinct told her it could be a trap, but her detective training also told her that someone was finally offering answers. She checked her service weapon, grabbed her investigation kit, and headed for the door. Whatever was happening to humanity, she was determined to find the truth. The corridors of the space station were dimly lit at night, with only emergency lighting casting long shadows on the walls. Sarah's footsteps echoed as she made her way toward the docking bays, her hand resting on her weapon. Docking Bay 7 was deserted when she arrived, filled only with the hum of life support systems and the occasional creak of metal expanding in the artificial atmosphere. Sarah checked her chronometer. 11:58 p.m. At exactly midnight, a figure stepped out from behind a cargo container. Sarah's hand moved to her weapon, but she froze when she saw who it was. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the head of xenobiology research at the colony, stood before her with tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry," Elena whispered. "I'm so sorry. I should have spoken up sooner, but I was afraid they would eliminate me too." "Who would eliminate you?" Sarah demanded. "What's going on, Elena?" "The Zilithians," Elena said, her voice breaking. "They're not what they appear to be. The health scans, the medical monitoring, it's all a lie. They're not trying to help us. They're studying us. And when they're done—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Sarah felt the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place, but the picture they formed was more terrifying than anything she had imagined. "Where are the missing humans?" Elena looked toward the stars visible through the docking bay's transparent aluminum windows. "That's what we need to find out, and we need to do it before they realize what we know." Dr. Elena Vasquez led Sarah through the maintenance corridors beneath the colony's medical center, moving quietly through spaces that most colonists never knew existed. Elena's hands shook as she activated her access codes, and Sarah could see the fear in the xenobiologist's eyes. "I started noticing the patterns 6 months ago," Elena whispered as they descended deeper into the facility. The Zilithians would request specific data about human physiology after each scan. They claimed it was for our protection, but the questions they asked were strange. Sarah followed Elena down a narrow staircase that seemed to go much deeper than necessary for a typical medical facility. What kind of questions? They wanted to know about human stress responses, pain tolerance, and something they called consciousness durability, Elena explained. When I asked what that meant, they said it was related to how human minds handle extreme environments. but their scans were detecting things that had nothing to do with environmental adaptation. They reached a heavy metal door marked with Zilithian symbols that Sarah couldn't read. Elena pressed her palm against a scanner, and the door slid open with a soft hiss. The room beyond was unlike anything Sarah had ever seen. Banks of computers lined the walls, displaying complex biological data streams. In the center of the room, a large tank filled with luminescent blue liquid hummed softly. Inside the liquid, organic shapes that looked disturbingly human-like floated in suspension. "What is this place?" Sarah demanded, her hand instinctively moving to her weapon. "This is what I discovered 3 weeks ago," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The Zilithians didn't just recommend these colony sites randomly. They chose them specifically because they're isolated, with minimal contact with the main galactic trade routes. Perfect for conducting experiments without interference." Sarah approached the tank cautiously. The floating shapes were definitely organic tissue, but they seemed incomplete, like pieces of a puzzle that hadn't been assembled yet. "Are these human tissue samples?" Elena confirmed. "But not just any samples. These are exact biological duplicates grown from the DNA of the missing colonists. The Zilithians have been perfecting a process they call consciousness transfer." The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. "They're trying to put human minds into artificial bodies?" Elena shook her head grimly. "Worse than that. They're trying to put their own minds into human bodies. The disappearances, the dust outlines, all of it makes sense now. They're using some kind of advanced teleportation technology to capture humans at the molecular level, break them down completely, and reconstruct them in their laboratories." Sarah stared at the data flowing across the computer screens, trying to process what she was seeing. Genetic sequences, brain scans, neural mapping patterns, all labeled with human names. David Kumar's data was there, along with hundreds of others. "Why?" Sarah asked. "What do they want with human bodies?" "That's what terrifies me," Elena replied, pulling up a file on one of the computers. "Look at this research data. The Zilithians aren't just advanced scientists, they're dying." The file revealed biological data about Zilithian physiology that had never been shared with the Galactic Council. Their species was suffering from genetic degradation, a slow breakdown of their cellular structure that would lead to extinction within a few generations. "They see humans as the solution," Elena continued. "Our genetic adaptability, our resilience, our ability to thrive in different environments. They want to transfer their consciousness into human bodies and continue their civilization using our biology." Sarah felt sick. "The Galactic Council, do they know?" "Some of them suspect, but they don't have proof. And the Zilithians have been very careful to make it look like a human problem. They're suggesting that we're genetically unstable, that we abandon our colonies because we can't handle space travel. It's the perfect cover." A soft alarm chimed from one of the computers, and Elena's face went pale. "Someone's accessing the medical center upstairs. We need to go now." They gathered as much data as they could carry and fled through the maintenance corridors. Sarah's mind raced as they climbed back toward the surface levels. She now understood why the disappearances had been so mysterious, why there was never any evidence of struggle or forced entry. The victims had been teleported away at the molecular level, probably while they were sleeping or relaxed after their medical scans. "We need to get this information to Earth," Sarah said as they reached the main level of the colony. "The human government needs to know what's really happening." "It won't be that simple," Elena replied. "The Zilithians control most of the communication networks between human colonies and Earth. Any message we send will be intercepted and blocked. We need another way." Sarah checked her chronometer. It was nearly 3 a.m., and the colony's corridors were empty except for automated maintenance systems. "What about the other species on the Galactic Council? Surely some of them would help us if they knew the truth." Maybe, Elena said doubtfully, but the Zilithians have been part of the Council for over 1,000 years. They have allies, trade agreements, political influence. Who's going to believe two humans over their word? They reached Sarah's apartment, and she immediately began encrypting copies of the data Elena had gathered. As she worked, a thought occurred to her that made her stomach turn. Elena, how many colonies are we talking about? How many humans have they taken? Elena consulted her tablet. Based on the data I've seen, they've been conducting small-scale experiments for almost 2 years. But in the last 6 months, they've accelerated the process dramatically. I estimate they've captured over 1,000 humans so far. Sarah's hands froze over her keyboard. 1,000 people taken from their homes and families, their bodies stolen for alien experimentation. The magnitude of the crime was almost incomprehensible. There's something else, Elena said quietly. According to their research files, they're planning something called Phase 3 within the next month. I couldn't access all the details, but it involves simultaneous operations across multiple human colonies. Mass abductions, Sarah realized. They're planning to take entire colonies. Elena nodded grimly. And once they perfect the consciousness transfer process, they won't need to hide anymore. They can openly claim that humans are abandoning their colonies, while secretly replacing our population with Zilithian minds in human bodies. Sarah saved the encrypted files to multiple storage devices, her training taking over even as her emotions threatened to overwhelm her. They needed proof that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. They needed evidence that would convince not just humans, but the entire Galactic Council. I have an idea, Sarah said, turning to Elena, but it's dangerous, and we might not survive it. Elena managed a weak smile. More dangerous than letting our entire species be replaced by aliens wearing our faces? Sarah outlined her plan. They would need to infiltrate the main Zilithian research facility, gather irrefutable evidence of the experiments, and find a way to transmit that evidence to multiple species simultaneously before the Zilithians could stop them. The facility is heavily guarded, Elena warned, and if they catch us, we'll disappear just like all the others. Then we better not get caught, Sarah replied, checking her equipment one final time. Because if we fail, humanity doesn't get a second chance. As dawn broke over New Geneva Colony, 2 determined humans prepared to risk everything to save their species from a fate worse than extinction. The truth was finally within reach, but reaching it might cost them their lives. The Zilithian research vessel, Quantum Synthesis, hung in the void between stars, its sleek biomechanical hull gleaming under the light of a distant nebula. Sarah and Elena approached in a stolen maintenance shuttle, their hearts pounding as automated security scans swept over their small craft. Access granted, the ship's computer announced in the melodic tones typical of Zilithian technology. Welcome, Dr. Vasquez. Please proceed to docking port 7. Elena had managed to maintain her clearance codes despite her unauthorized investigation, and the Zilithians apparently hadn't yet realized she posed a threat. It was a small advantage, but Sarah knew it might be the only one they would get. The docking port sealed around their shuttle with organic-looking tendrils that made Sarah's skin crawl. Everything about Zilithian technology seemed to blur the line between machine and living organism, creating vessels that felt more grown than built. Remember, Elena whispered as they prepared to exit the shuttle, act like we belong here. The Zilithians can sense emotional distress, so keep your thoughts calm and professional. Sarah nodded, checking the hidden recording devices concealed in her clothing one final time. They had enough storage capacity to document whatever they found, assuming they lived long enough to transmit the evidence. The corridors of the research vessel were dimly lit and warm, with a humid atmosphere that reminded Sarah uncomfortably of being inside a massive lung. Zilithian crew members moved past them with fluid grace, their tall, blue-skinned forms barely acknowledging the two humans. Elena led them through a maze of passages toward the ship's core laboratories. The organic walls seemed to pulse with a rhythm that might have been a heartbeat or might have been the ship's power systems. Sarah couldn't tell the difference. "The main consciousness transfer laboratory should be just ahead," Elena murmured, consulting a bioorganic tablet that interfaced directly with the ship's navigation system. They rounded a corner and froze. The corridor ahead was filled with Zilithians in what appeared to be ceremonial garments, their usually calm demeanor replaced by obvious excitement. Through the crowd, Sarah caught glimpses of a massive chamber beyond. "Phase 3, Elena breathed. "They're beginning Phase 3. Sarah activated her recording devices and pressed forward, using her smaller human stature to move through the crowd of distracted aliens. What she saw in the chamber beyond would haunt her for the rest of her life. Hundreds of transparent tubes lined the walls, each one containing a perfect human body suspended in the same blue liquid they had seen in the underground laboratory. But these bodies were moving, their eyes open, their mouths forming silent words. "The consciousness transfer is already underway," Elena whispered, her face pale with horror. "Those are the missing humans. Their minds are still active, but they're trapped in artificial bodies while the Zilithians study their neural patterns." At the center of the chamber stood the largest Zilithian Sarah had ever seen, its blue skin marked with intricate silver patterns that seemed to shift and change as she watched. When it spoke, its voice resonated through the chamber with an authority that commanded absolute attention. "My people," the Zilithian leader announced, "today we begin the final phase of our species' salvation. The human neural architecture has proven even more adaptable than our projections indicated. Their capacity for emotional processing, creative problem-solving, and biological resilience exceeds anything we have encountered in our 1,000 years of galactic exploration." Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized the full scope of what she was witnessing. This wasn't just about preserving the Zilithian species. It was about conquest. "The consciousness transfer process has been perfected," the leader continued. "We can now successfully implant our memories, knowledge, and essential identity patterns into human neural networks while preserving the biological functions that make their bodies so remarkably efficient." Elena grabbed Sarah's arm, pointing to a display screen that showed a map of human space. Red markers indicated dozens of colonies, and as they watched, the markers began changing from red to blue in a carefully coordinated sequence. "They're not just targeting isolated colonies," Elena whispered. "They're planning to replace the entire human population." The Zilithian leader gestured toward the tubes containing the trapped humans. "Each successful transfer teaches us more about human consciousness. Soon, we will be able to create perfect copies of human minds while implanting our own consciousness as the dominant personality. To outside observers, we will be indistinguishable from the original humans." Sarah forced herself to keep recording even as rage and horror threatened to overwhelm her professional composure. She watched as technicians began connecting neural interface cables to several of the suspended humans, their faces contorting in what could only be pain as alien thoughts were forced into their minds. "The Galactic Council suspects nothing," the leader announced with what might have been satisfaction. "They believe humans are simply abandoning their colonies due to genetic instability. When our transformation is complete, we will not only survive as a species, we will thrive with the biological advantages that evolution denied us." But then something unexpected happened. One of the suspended humans, a young woman Sarah recognized from the missing persons files, began to convulse violently. Alarms sounded throughout the chamber as the monitoring equipment registered massive neural activity. "Consciousness rejection pattern detected," a technician reported, its melodic voice tinged with concern. The human mind is actively resisting the transfer process. The leader moved closer to examine the readings. Impossible. The neural pathways should be completely suppressed at this stage. But the woman in the tube was far from suppressed. Her eyes had snapped open, and she was staring directly at the Zilithian leader with an expression of pure, defiant rage. Somehow, impossibly, she was fighting back. "Alert the research team immediately," the leader commanded. "If humans can resist the consciousness transfer, we need to understand how before we proceed with the mass operations." Sarah realized this was her moment. The Zilithians had revealed their entire plan, and she had documented every word. But more importantly, she had witnessed something they didn't expect. Human consciousness was more resilient than they had calculated. Elena was already moving toward the chamber's communication array, her fingers flying over bioorganic controls as she accessed the ship's transmission systems. "I can broadcast this to every species in the Galactic Council simultaneously," she whispered. "But once I start the transmission, they'll know we're here." Sarah nodded grimly. "Do it." Elena initiated the transmission sequence, and immediately every alarm on the ship began to sound. The ceremonial gathering dissolved into chaos as Zilithian security forces began searching for the source of the unauthorized broadcast. "Transmission active," Elena reported. "Every government in known space is receiving this recording." The Zilithian leader's head snapped toward their position, its silver patterns now glowing with what Sarah assumed was anger. "Humans in Section 7. Terminate them immediately." Sarah drew her sidearm, knowing it would be useless against advanced alien technology, but determined to sell her life as expensively as possible. But as Zilithian guards advanced toward them, something extraordinary happened. Every suspended human in the chamber began to convulse simultaneously. The consciousness transfer equipment overloaded as hundreds of human minds rejected the alien intrusion at once. The Zilithians had underestimated something fundamental about human nature: their absolute refusal to surrender their identity, even in the face of overwhelming odds. "Cascade failure in all neural transfer matrices," a technician reported in growing panic. "Human consciousness appears to be contagious. The rejection pattern is spreading faster than we can compensate." The chamber erupted in chaos as containment systems failed, and the trapped humans began to break free from their restraints. Years of suppressed rage and determination exploded outward as they turned on their captors with improvised weapons and bare hands. Sarah and Elena fought their way toward the nearest escape route as the Zilithian research vessel tore itself apart around them. The transmission was complete, the evidence had been broadcast, and humanity's true nature had been revealed in the most dramatic way possible. As their stolen shuttle cleared the dying research vessel, Sarah watched through the viewports as rescue ships from a dozen different species converged on their position. The Galactic Council had received the evidence, and for the first time in galactic history, an entire species would be held accountable for attempted genocide. But most importantly, the missing humans were finally coming home. Battered, traumatized, but unbroken, they had proven that human consciousness couldn't be stolen, suppressed, or replaced. They had faced the ultimate violation of their identity and refused to surrender. The Zilithians had made a critical error in their calculations. They had assumed that human adaptability meant human submissiveness. They discovered too late that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their biology, but their indomitable will to remain human, no matter the cost. As Earth's response fleet arrived to escort the survivors home, Sarah smiled for the first time in weeks. The truth was finally out. And humanity had proven once again that they belonged among the stars, not as subjects or specimens, but as equals who would never bow to those who sought to steal their very souls.